Welcome, everyone. What a pleasure it is to be here today, our final event of the fall season. My name is Dr. Lynn Vartan, and in addition to teaching music here at Southern Utah University, I'm the director of APEX events, and we are celebrating our fall season, and we are celebrating the Levitt Center and the first recipient of its great award. It has been such a pleasure to have our guests on campus, Ambassador Korologos and Secretary McLaughlin Korologos. We are so thrilled to have you in residence and speaking with our students and interacting with all of us. So thank you to them, thank you to the Levitt Center, to Mary and to Doug for this incredible collaboration. I believe the first of its kind, but hopefully not the last. We're thrilled to hopefully continue this in years to come. At this time, I would like to welcome President Wyatt to the stage for a few opening remarks.
Welcome. In celebration of the Levitt Center's 20th anniversary, the Center is pleased to announce the creation of the Levitt Center Award for Distinguished Public Service. This award is given to an individual with a lifetime of extraordinary public service and who has brought exceptional recognition to the people of the state of Utah. I'm pleased to announce the first recipient of this award, Ambassador Tom C. Korologos. There you are. And I'm delighted to see that you still have your beautiful sling. It matches the color of your jacket perfectly. Ambassador Korologos was born and raised in Utah and ascended to the height of public service in the United States. His service career started in the United States Air Force and then to journalism. He then went to Washington, D.C. to work in the United States Senate and as a staffer in several White Houses. He was chosen for a leadership role in the Coalition Provisional Authority in Baghdad. He's been appointed to the Broadcasting Board of Governors and the United States Advisory Commission on Public Diplomacy, and was chosen by President George W. Bush to serve as the U.S. ambassador to the Kingdom of Belgium. What a lifetime of interesting experiences and a variety of opportunities to provide service. At this time, I'd like to share a message from Governor Michael Levitt.
I'm delighted that Tom Korologos will be the first recipient of the Levitt Center Award for Distinguished Public Service. Tom, congratulations. And may I say how pleased I am that your name will once and for all be associated with this center, as is mine. And I'm very appreciative of the effort and the fact that we're now 20 years into what I think will be a long history. So thank you all for supporting the center, and thank you, Tom, for your support, and congratulations.
We had a delightful time at dinner last night, and I think you're going to enjoy hearing from the ambassador. Now I'd like to welcome to the stand Dixie Levitt. Come on up, Dixie.
It is a pleasure to be here representing my son, who ought to be the one doing this, but I was asked by those in authority here to take his place. And I want you to know that it is a privilege. I wish I could see your faces, but I can't. The lights are such. But let me just mention to you that I've admired Tom Korologos for years and years and years, even before I got involved in the legislative process. He was a writer for the Salt Lake Tribune, and much of his history has been given by President Wyatt. But I got to know Tom in 1962. I was a candidate for the State House of Representatives representing this area. Tom started his work with Senator Wallace Bennett in 1962 as his press secretary. And he was with him for, I think, about 9 years. And it evolved to where he became the chief of staff of Senator Bennett. And he apparently represented Senator Bennett very well because he has progressed all the way through. I'm not going to take much of your time because you're going to want to have it with him, but I want you to know that he is so well respected. As you start to read through the biography that was provided me, things that I didn't know, he served with and served with many presidents and vice presidents, and when a new president was coming in, he was involved in the transition types of things, and where he'd have to get a place of influence to determine leadership. And I go through some of the names here that the Bushes, both Bushes, Nixon, Ford. I go down here, the names are very, very familiar to me. They wouldn't be maybe to you unless you're a historic, political historian here. But he's done a great job at representing Utah, but representing the United States, and representing his influence is felt all over the world. And as you go through here, I counted up 15 different board of directors that he serves on, has served and serves on. And I think he is a wealth of knowledge, and I just want to express to you my feelings on that. He's here with his good wife, wonderful wife, I guess. But she was the secretary of the labor under the Reagan administration. So I'm pleased to recommend and introduce them to you and turn the time over to whoever is going to be in charge with a high recommendation to pay attention to what this man has to say, because he's very, very knowledgeable and has had great experience. And I appreciate this opportunity to introduce you. Thank you.
We'd like to present you with this award. It's a bit heavy. So we'll pretend like we're handing it to you, and then I'll put it on this desk.
Thank you. Come on in here. President Wyatt, friends all at Southern Utah University. Shakespeare said it best, I can no other answer make, but thanks and thanks and ever thanks. What a signal honor for me to return to my Utah roots to receive the very first Levitt Center Award for Distinguished Public Service here at Southern Utah University. Two things come to mind as I stand here today in this beautiful setting before my family, the faculty, students, distinguished guests all. First, I hope that a father or a mother somewhere tells their young son or daughter, hey, did you see the other day down in Cedar City, SUU and former Dixie Levitt, the state chairman of the state legislator from Utah, presented a big deal award to that Greek guy from Utah. He grew up in Salt Lake, worked in his dad's bar, worked as a sports writer on the paper, worked his way through college, ended up in Washington working in the Senate, then the White House, and was even in Iraq for a year, and later became an ambassador. He kept his nose clean, son, was loyal to his belief and his causes, made it a point to help others, wasn't afraid to volunteer for pro bono projects, which helped the country and the community. And with a little bit of luck and energy, he did quite well, didn't he? So, son or daughter, I hope you never forget your roots. Hope some of what that Korologos guy did might rub off on you someday, and you can follow your chosen path to some kind of achievement award yourself. The second thing that comes to mind as I stand here and look at those around me is how many years of public service are represented here today. My gosh, you have your own distinguished SUU alum and former 3 times governor-elect, my friend Mike Levitt, whose presentation here was absolutely amazing, and thank him. He later served in Washington as Secretary of Health and Human Services and as Administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency. And I appreciate very much his father, Dixie Levitt, here today. Always a pleasure to be in your midst, Mr. Levitt. Whenever I'm around Mr. Levitt, I always get a feeling of good. He was a leader in the Utah legislature for 18 years, and it was a pleasure working with him. What a real pro, and a delight to have him around. You have someone very dear and near to me, Mrs. Korologos, like Dixie said. Another U.S. cabinet member, Secretary of Labor under President Reagan, former Assistant Secretary of Treasury, Deputy Secretary of Interior, served as chairman of the Aspen Institute, Rand Corporation, Pan Am 103 Commission, now chairs the Middle East Investment Commission. You have your own SUU president, Scott Wyatt, former president of Snow College, member of the Utah House of Representatives and a former Cache County attorney. You have your SUU provost, Brad Cook, former Special Projects Director of Utah Valley State College and former president of the Abu Dhabi Women's College in the UAE. You have Kevin Jacobson, retired Army Colonel, 30 years service in the U.S. Army Judge Advocate General's Corps. First Lieutenant Korologos, salute you, sir. You have Professor Douglas Bennett, former member of the staff of the U.S. House Energy and Commerce Committee. And don't forget his grandfather, Senator Wallace Bennett, and his uncle, Senator Robert Bennett. And Mary Bennett, your own director of the Levitt Center, who spent 25 years in Washington, both in the U.S. House and Senate and in the regulatory arena under the Securities and Exchange Commission, and who staged this magnificent event and this award ceremony today. Mary, I love you. Where are you? And why stop there? You have my brother Mike, who was deeply involved in the bid and subsequent great success of the Winter Olympics in Utah, in Salt Lake in 2002. And even my sister Elaine, who unofficially runs and is chief cook and coordinator of the annual Greek festival in Salt Lake. Stop by sometime. The point of this litany, and the one thread that runs through all of it, is public service. All the luminaries that I have named, and more here probably I have missed, have willingly performed a service of benefit to the public. Yeah, public service has its ups and downs, and especially in election years. But there's nothing really more rewarding than serving your country, your church, your school, your community. So for you SUU students here today, don't be deterred by what you've been reading during the last few months, as I say, during election time. What you have is democracy in action, from Cedar City to Cedar Rapids, from St. George to St. Louis. Seen anybody in Moscow or Pyongyang or Beijing or Damascus petition their government for redress of grievances lately? Don't be discouraged over what you've seen on the nightly news or the Twitter feeds. Branch out. Don't be one-note Charlies. Take advantage of the distraction-free zone in which you find yourselves. Go take off-the-wall history classes. Go take a political science or government class outside your major arena. Take an English class. You might learn to write a sentence with a beginning and an end. Take a basic math or economic class. Take an art class over here at the SUMA and have that director, Jessica Farling, tell you about the Jimmy Jones collection. Take a geography class and find out where Yemen is, where Djibouti is, where the Straits of Hormuz are. Take a music class. Join any number of other school enterprises. You got a lot of extracurricular talent here. Go take advantage of it. Take the risk. Jump in. The country needs you now more than ever to step up and take the reins from all us old codgers. As you have read and heard this morning, I made it a practice to give back. I can't say no when asked to someone do a pro bono job with a Senate confirmation, with an advisory board and an interview mentoring an up-and-comer. There really is nothing more rewarding than watching others whose lives you have touched, seeing them succeed. Professor Bennett is Exhibit A. One of my most gratifying moments is to smile at a swearing-in ceremony or at a welcome aboard event in the private sector of someone who's crossed my path, who and I assisted along the way. So, my profound thanks to all of you at SUU and the Levitt Center for this honor, and to you students and future leaders. Go serve your government. Go serve your community. Give it a shot. If you're not sure how to get there, ask someone who has been there. We've got you surrounded. Thank you.
Mr. Ambassador, welcome to Southern Utah University. We couldn't be happier that you're here. I have to tell you a brief story. When Tom was invited, he accepted graciously the honor, and he subsequently called me to say that he had taken a fall. He has broken a rib, he has broken his nose, he is stitched over the head, and his arm's in a sling. And I said, what are we going to do? And he said, I'm going to go to the doctor on Tuesday. I got out of the hospital. The doctor is going to tell me on Tuesday whether I can come. I said, okay. I got word Tuesday night he's coming. I drove to Las Vegas yesterday to pick him up. I said, I'm so glad you're here. The doctor said yes. He said, no. The doctor said no. I said, then what are you doing here? He said, I would send my body to get that award. I just, from a personal standpoint, like to say I'm glad we got this rather than the body, if I may. Tom, as the introduction has indicated, you've worked in 5 White Houses, you've followed politics, you've run campaigns. We just had a rather strange election. In fact, it's still going on, recounts, including in our own state. What lessons do you take from this election, and are things as bad as we're told?
Well, first of all, we were told before the election that a wave was coming. A red wave, a blue wave is going to go up to our shores. Don't forget what waves do. Waves bring in garbage. Waves also take out garbage. So the red states have become redder, the blue states have become bluer. The election was... The polls were sort of right. The prediction was going to be the House was going to go 25 or 45 losses for the Republicans. It turns out there are about 35. The Senate, on the other hand, picked up 2 or 3 seats, as you say. Florida, where elections never end, is still counting, and who knows what that's going to be. What it's going to mean is there's a 2020 coming up, and it's already started. I have right here on my iPhone events that they are inviting me to go to for 2020 for the election. What is it going to mean for 2020? People are running for president. They're already staking out positions. I read the other day there are 33 Democratic lists. There are 33 Democrats fixing to run for president. My favorite is the mayor of Terre Haute, Indiana. I'm not sure I know who he is, but I'm for him. And of course, President Trump and what he's doing, what you're going to see is the House can go two ways. They can already have a list of 95 investigations that they'd like to conduct against Trump, from people going to Trump restaurant from out of country because that's the emoluments clause, or people, he's got classified material in his room in Mar-a-Lago. He's done, let alone the Mueller and the Russian collusion and what have you. If they go down that route, it's going to hurt them and the country. On the other hand, if they come up with an agenda of some kind, working with the Republicans on some kind of a bipartisan way, impeachment trials and what have you, show me 67 votes in the Senate, and then we talk about that. They're not even close. So it can go two ways, and the House will be investigating everything. The Senate will be trying to pass amending and everything. You're going to see a lot of gridlock. Fortunately, in the first 2 years between the Senate and the House, they did restore some of the defense sequestration money that was tying up our Defense Department. There's always going to be a health care fight. There's immigration at the borders. There's always the tax benefits issue. So what I see, I hope I don't see gridlock, but it's coming. Nominations are a mess. There are 60 or 75. Embassies are empty. There's no ambassador in Turkey, no ambassador in Saudi Arabia. Syria, we have no way of finding out. Yeah, there are people there, but we have no way of finding out what's going on. So what I'm saying is it's a mixed bag. Some Democrats are claiming big victory, and it is turning into a bigger victory than we thought a week ago Tuesday. And the Republicans are gaining a Senate seat or two. The Democrats say that the House leadership will prevent, put a check on what Trump is doing. And what does that say? It says there ain't much going to happen.
You mentioned nominations, and the Washington Post said that you have handled more executive nominations than anyone in D.C. I think this may be a rare instance where the Post is accurate, and if that is the case, I'd be interested to hear your reflections on some of the challenging nominees. Yeah, I know you were in charge of the Bork nomination. That one went down. You did Rehnquist. He was confirmed Chief Justice. Talk to us about the process, and what does a shepherd do?
Well, nominations are, the president has 2,500 nominations to make that have to be confirmed by the Senate. It's a large number. A lot of them you never hear about because they don't require major hearings. They don't require major TV extravaganzas like you saw the other day with Kavanaugh. But nominations are a unique event to a person. Somebody calls you up from White House personnel and says, "Hi, we want you to be Secretary of Labor." And you say, "Gee whiz, you've never been to a hearing before. You've never been to you've been to court, you've been to speeches, you've been to seminars at schools and what have you, but to go before the Senate is a kind of a unique and quite an experience." So the first thing I say to them when they send them to me, and I've done this both in the White House and in the private sector, and by the way, it's pro bono, I don't charge anything for that. I do it for my country. The first thing I say is, tell me what is there in your background you have done that's going to embarrass the president or embarrass you, because you can absolutely count on it that during the hearing they're going to ask it. And I said this to one guy from the State Department, can't remember what his job was, and he paused and looked at me for a second, and I looked at him, and he said, "How do they know that?" And I said, "What?" And he said, "Oh, never mind." He withdrew his name. I don't know to this day whether what he had done. The other fun one I said that to, President Ford nominated, first of all, we handled President Ford's nomination for vice president. Nixon's nomination of President Ford for vice president, under the 25th Amendment, vice presidents have to be confirmed by both the House and the Senate under the 25th Amendment. And so we got Ford through. Ford became president. Now we need a vice president. So he reached out and got Nelson Rockefeller, Governor Rockefeller. And we were in the Oval Office there, and the president announced Nelson, Governor Rockefeller, applause, everybody happy. And the Oval Office, there were 6 or 8 doors, and people all went out various doors. And I was standing there with the governor. And I said, Governor, you and I are about to get married. Let's go. My office. And he said, yes, I want to talk to you. As we're walking down the hall, I asked him, what is there in your background that's making you nervous about this whole thing, this hearing, or what? Oh, gosh, thank you for asking me. He said, first of all, I said, look, you don't need to tell me, but get an answer because they're going to ask it. And he said, yeah, is my financial disclosure form going to be made public? And I said, just as sure as God made little green apples, yes. It'll be made public because somebody will leak it in a minute. I said, well, why? What's wrong with that? And he said, well, my friends and peers are going to realize they're not as rich as I think as I am. He said, and his net worth indeed was only $350, $400 million. And he was worried. It wasn't the billions we all thought. He had oil here, and he had art there, and he had property somewhere. And I remember a week or 10 days later, there was a story in the Washington paper that said, what's he hiding? He's only got $350 million. So he was worried about what his peers would think, that he's not as rich as he thinks he is. But the other thing you say is your role in this nomination confirmation thing is that of a bridegroom at a wedding. Stay out of the way, be on time, and keep your mouth shut. And we might make it through. The other thing you say to him is, aside from the policy stuff, the other thing that we drum into their head, and you've seen it if you watch television sometime, it doesn't always happen. Follow the 80-20 rule. That is, if you're talking 20% of the time, and the senators are talking 80%, you're winning. This hearing isn't about you, it's about them. This is questions they are asking, and they want them to look good, and they're quizzing of you. So if it's 80-20, you're winning. If it's 60-40, you're arguing. You're arguing with them. You don't need to argue. And it's 50-50, you've blown it, forget it, withdraw your name. You cannot argue and make the Senate look bad in its own eyes. There are little tricks you use. You find what's your family? Well, we have 2 or 3 little kids. Bring them. Who else is there? My father's a priest. Bring him. Wear his white collar. Put him on the front row. Do you have any other friends that we can bring in as allies that can speak at your hearing? Yes, there was an old college professor. Yeah, bring him in. So there are all kinds of little tidbits and tricks you use to get through. Then you get into the policy stuff. What's your position on Middle East initiatives, and what is your position? The policy guys, he's supposed to have that. Don't forget, candidate, you're smarter on that issue than they are. So you got to be careful in how you answer. And you don't embarrass or insult a senator. There are ways to answer senators. If a senator comes in a little late and you've answered the question already, you don't say, as I just said, you say, oh, gee whiz, that's a great question. So the point is, you have to be careful in what you say and what you do. Kavanaugh hearing. Kavanaugh broke all the rules. In the first place, you don't go on television 2 nights before your big hearing and have a TV interview. That's kind of an insult to the Senate. You are allowed only to talk to senators. You can't talk to the media. You can say 3 words. If confirmed, working with this committee, it would be an honor to serve with you. That's all that you can say in public. But Kavanaugh had the TV thing, and then he went a little over the top in his attacking the senators. But it worked. He had been maligned. He had a kicked out of him pretty solidly. He felt that he had to respond strongly, and there was a lot of showmanship going on in that hearing. There were 3 or 4 of them on the committee who were running for president, for heaven's sake. This was their first spring training public exhibition on the 2020 election. So that had to be handled. But it worked for him, and the rules had changed, and they allowed only 51. You now only have 51 votes to get confirmed. There are 1,000 stories about confirmations. All of them, most of them pretty good. The Bork thing was a tragedy. He was probably the best, smartest justice I ever worked with. I worked with Kennedy. I worked with Rehnquist. I worked with Scalia. But Bork was as good, if not better, than all of them. And what they did to him was the beginning of the philosophical question of a nominee. Usually you took you went through and you decided whether he was qualified for the job to which he had been appointed. And they went beyond that. And you see it now in all the Supreme Court nominees that we've had since then. I could go on for the rest of the afternoon and talk about confirmations.
Well, we've got something perhaps even more interesting, a question that Lynn would like to pose.
Absolutely. I have been fascinated with your direct service with presidents. And as mentioned earlier, you have directly served 5 presidents. And I was wondering if you might share impressions or favorite stories, or just give us some exploration into those people that you served.
Well, I was on the Hill 9 years working for Senator Bennett, and they called me one day and they said, "Come on down, you're a Senate insider. We need Senate help to do liaison with the Senate and the Nixon administration." So I went down, worked for President Nixon as the Senate liaison. Come to discover, personality-wise, Nixon was a former vice president under Eisenhower, and Eisenhower didn't give him much to do, as the history books have all shown. So what did Nixon do? He went overseas. He became an expert on foreign policy because you can spoon feed the press, and he wasn't around doing the domestic stuff that Eisenhower was doing. So he became an expert on foreign affairs and what have you. So he loved and worked the foreign policy area. He was in the middle of Russia, in the middle of Middle East, middle of South America, and everywhere. The domestic side, you could tell a little bit if you could rerun a State of the Union address. He would give this long speech about what's going on foreign policy-wise, and he'd slow and deliberate, and 1, 2, 3, and here's what we need to do. And on the domestic side, well, there's 3 or 4, 5 things, and we get those done. So it was the interest was showed. Nixon was shy. He was uncomfortable in public. I don't know how he got elected. We had trouble bringing him into the cabinet room to tell the leaders that the Vietnam War was winding down or was ending. We had to give him areas of conversation with friends of his. He was an old vice president that knew the House guys, that knew the Senate guys, so he was comfortable with those people. He was a pack rat. You want to talk about the Watergate tapes? That's what do pack rats do? Gather tapes. There was a Halloween party after his first year or something, and my friend Wally Johnson was friendly with one of the Nixon daughters, and they went to the Halloween party, and Nixon said, "Save the masks. They'll be good for the library." So you're saving Halloween masks. So, I mean, don't tell the Nixon library these things. But he was smart as could be, a good, canny politician. The one thing about Watergate that drove me crazy was Nixon and Mitchell were too smart to let that happen. How did this happen? And that was a disappointment in how they let that get out of control. Ford.
Let me interrupt for 1 minute. After Watergate, I was in Washington, and I asked Tom how, because many of your former colleagues went to jail.
Yeah.
And I asked Tom how he was bearing up, and he said, I'm fine. Everybody says to me, if you're so important, why aren't you in jail? Excuse me.
Some truth in that. So one day, Agnew gets in trouble. Agnew was chosen as vice president because they wanted the Rockefeller wing. Agnew was the Rockefeller wing guy running against Nixon in that election that year, and they needed the Rockefeller votes at the convention, so they named Agnew governor of Maryland as vice president. And unfortunately, he didn't stop doing his thing and taking some extra payments and what have you. So he resigned. The stories, I'll tell you one Agnew story that was interesting. So Nixon, Kissinger and all of them are getting ready for China. And one day they told us when I was on the White House staff, you got to tell these 3 or 4 senators to be sure to watch TV tonight because Nixon's going on television with a major statement. And they said, by the way, Vice President Agnew is president of the Senate. And he was at the Senate that day, and somebody said, where's Agnew? I said, well, he's over here in the next room. And he said, go tell him to be sure to watch television tonight. And I puzzled by that. The Vice President of the United States is being told by me to watch the President on television tonight. And I went in, and he said, what do you think it is, Tom? And I said, well, I think it has something to do with China, because they had me see Dominic and Goldwater and 2 or 3 House guys that were China junkies. And he said, yeah, you're probably right. So Nixon gets on TV and announces China, we're going to go, Kissinger's been there, laying the groundwork, I'm going to China. But it was kind of a remarkable thing. They hadn't clued him in. This was a little Kissinger in action, too. So Ford now becomes president. What a president. What is Ford? Ford is a former House person. What do House people do? Somebody says 10, somebody says 5. We agree on 7.5 and go home. Dixie Levitt will tell you that. That happens every day. I should go back for a second. Nixon was a lawyer. What do lawyers do? They like yellow pads. They like long briefs. They write briefs. They write with pens. Ford, as I say, is a congressman. Brought memory members down, loose office. I went by one day and 2 or 3 guys were hanging in the Oval Office with their feet over the couch. I went in, took Russell Long down. Jim, he became president. So one day Nixon resigns. Our long national nightmare is over. And Nixon gets on a plane, and now we are going to meet President Ford, sworn in by Earl Warren in the East Room. So then we have the leadership ready to come in to see the president, the new president. And I did something that was, I'm not sure, that was all right. President Ford is sitting here, the leadership is sitting over there, and the president said, well, let's bring the leadership in, and they're all waiting to stand there, and the president said, by the way, Tom, he said, you're the only guy around here that knows the Senate. Everybody else is a House person. I'm this, and Hartman, and Griffin, and Timmons, and all these guys are House people. So I was the first guy Jerry Ford hired as president. I said to myself, don't let anybody talk you into leaving. And so I went downstairs to the mess for lunch right after it was over, and I said, you Nixon guys are in a heap of trouble. But anyway, Ford, as I say, was a little looser, wasn't structured president. He said, let's bring some leaders down and talk to them. There was a tax bill pending. We brought Senator Long down, chairman of the Finance Committee, to do a tax bill. And Long was one of these guys that pulled his chair forward. And he kept pulling more forward to the president. Pretty soon he's got his hand on Ford's knee, and he's saying, here's what we got to do on this tax bill. Here's what you're going to need to do on that. Here's what you need to do like that. I got a little nervous because Senator Long was kind of telling Ford, here's what we need, here's what we're going to do. And the president, he's been president now 3 days, he's not reacting. The president left from there and went to a summit conference in the Caribbean somewhere with other world leaders, came back, and he said, let's have Russell Long back. Brought Russell Long back. This time, in that week's period, Ford became president. He said, now, Russell, here's what we're going to do. It's going to be like this. Now you tell Wilbur Mills, this is what I want. And I was going to pick him up by the legs and carry him around. So he learned. He was a great personal guy. Loved him to death. He was one of us. Who's next? Then
Reagan.
President Reagan gets the nomination one day. We worked in the transition. We worked in the Reagan administration. I helped with his confirmations. I took him around to meet he's got elected, and my partner Bill Timmons ran the transition, and first thing we did when he came to town was took him to the Hill to meet Tip O'Neill. So I took President Reagan in with Tip O'Neill and myself. Here these two Irishmen BSing each other. It was quite remarkable to hear him talking. Now, here we're going to get along. And they get along pretty good. Never mind the policy stuff was made a lot of problems, but Reagan was a great communicator. What was he? He'd bring into the office what he was before. Great communicator, had a chief of staff mentality, had all these operating companies and Baker and Deaver and McLaughlin and whoever over there running the various departments, and they report to him. And as long as they kept their philosophy going, and Mr. Gorbachev tear down this wall, he was a hardliner. He rebuilt the 600-ship Navy with Secretary Lehman, and he was really an outstanding human being and a personal guy. I used to take the Greek HEPA guys in to meet him, and we'd sit down, and the Greek Archbishop was a Red Sox fan. So I'm sitting in the Oval Office, and President and Archbishop talking Red Sox baseball. But it was that kind of an experience. H.W. Bush comes in as vice president. What was H.W.? H.W. Bush had more experience in the executive branch than any president probably ever. I can't tell you what McKinley did or John Quincy Adams, but H.W. was a congressman. He was chairman of the Republican National Committee, ran the CIA. He was a vice president. He was a UN ambassador, 100 things in the executive branch. He knew the government. He knew the government probably better than any of those other people that come in off the street. And he was took up a lot of the Reagan legacy. Some of it he didn't do, and it cost him. He was a good personal guy. I took my son Philip on an Air Force One ride with him one time when we went somewhere campaigning. I campaigned with Ford too. That was fun. And H.W. was it was good. It was a sorry thing to see him lose. George W., former governor, former owner of the part owner of the Texas Rangers. The other thing that I usually say at these things, that when a president comes in, expect the unexpected. How far back do you want to go? Eisenhower with a U-2, Truman with a steel strike. And you enter George W. Bush, and he's president what? Short time, and 9/11 happens. And it defines your presidency for the rest of the time. You have to cope with that. You have to worry about the safety of this shall never happen again. Ann was on the Pan Am 103 Commission, and they could have learned from what happened at Pan Am 103 prior to 9/11. But W was he was a good guy. He did interesting things. We got into Iraq. He said these guys are not going to get away with this. You saw him on the megaphone, sitting on top of that broken truck and at the tower, at the Twin Tower place, and so he got to the sanctuaries in Iraq, in Iran, and Afghanistan. Ditto Iraq. They sent the Coalition Provisional Authority over there, and they asked me to go help with that. And we dealt with him a lot from that standpoint. He gave us almost anything we wanted. And I came back, went to the signing ceremony, and he said, I want to thank you. You gave me a year of your life. See me after. And so I went in the back room, and there was President Bush, Karl Rove, Andy Card, personnel person, and somebody. And he said, you gave me a year of life. Everybody else gave me $1 million. I want to make you an ambassador. Where do you want to go? And I said, anywhere that doesn't end in Stan. and so off I went to Brussels, and he came over. Ann and I were there and hosted him, and Mrs. Bush. And Ann was on the Kellogg board at the time, and so they brought in breakfast, and he brought his own Wheaties. And Ann took great umbrage with the president eating General Mills instead of Kellogg. But he was just, and we still see each other once in a while, and it's a pleasure. Which, one more sidebar too, as I say, presidents bring into the job what they were before. Trump, Obama, all of them, they were before. Trump was a developer. Obama was an organizer. So they all supposedly and hopefully have their best interests of the country at heart. And it's, now that you mention it, it's quite a privilege to have done that for 5 of them.
5 of them. You mentioned the Coalition Provisional Authority in Iraq. You went to Iraq. The president asked you to go to Iraq. How old were you when you went?
How old?
Yeah.
70.
70.
Wasn't I
With the
young?
first wave. So you slept on the dirt.
Slept on the dirt.
What were you doing in Iraq at age 70?
The same doctor said, don't go. Said, you're crazy.
I said you were crazy. We all thought you were crazy.
What I did was they needed, it was early, they had a whole bunch of money to spend, and they had a whole bunch of members of Congress fixing to come. That first year, 2003 in Iraq, I didn't host them, I babysat 275 members of Congress came through to Iraq. You had to find buses, you had to find secure planes, you had to find food. You didn't eat any of the local food. You had stuff shipped in from Kuwait. You had to find some of them sleeping. You had to find bathrooms. Try going to an Army bathroom that's both boy and girl. And you send Senator Jones into a co-ed bathroom and see how far that gets you. So then it was interesting. We took them around. They all wanted to see hospitals. They all wanted to see sewer construction. They all wanted to see oil. We took them to the oil fields up north in Mosul, where it was Iraq is the 3rd or 4th or something largest producer of oil in the world, except they have no refining capacity. And we went to oil fields where they had Turkish towels wrapped around pipes, preventing leaking. None of it was digitized. All of it was old hand crank. We visited one guy that ran one of the oil refineries, and he had to get up and make a phone call to change something on the oil. Saddam had let it deteriorate so bad, and I had emailed Ann. I said, Ann, I feel like George Washington. We're sitting here creating a country. Then I thought about it, and I said, we're doing worse than that. We got to destroy what there was here before we can make a country. George, at least he started from scratch, but we had to start from nowhere. At the beginning of get that stuff out of here, we had to create currency. We had to create a government. What we did is we brought in an oil expert, a health expert, a agriculture expert, a cultural expert, what have you from elsewhere, to run departments and agencies. And he went out and found an agriculture, an oil, a cultural, or what have you, Iraqi to sit next to him. And as the Iraqi grew in his capacity to handle it, the American would disappear. And it went well in a lot of areas. One of the fun ones was the cultural minister was an Italian. Italy, the coalition had a lot of people there, and the Italian guy was a big cultural guy, so he went out and found that there used to be an Iraqi symphony orchestra. And Saddam had forbade bourgeois symphonic music. So all these guys had gone, practiced their instruments at night, hid their instruments in haystacks, and finally would practice. And this guy found them, and so we're going to put on a concert. So off Bremer and I went to the first concert. There were horns with masking tape around them, violins with strings dabbling down, and they put on this concert. It was a hall, 200 or 300 people, and the old national anthem, pre-Saddam, had a little lilt in it. Can't remember what it was, or da-dum, 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 and people stood on their chairs crying that they had heard this old national anthem again. Welcome to a free Iraq is what the theme was. And it went on it was not really very good, but it was good. And so I came back, and we lived in Washington at the time, and the same condo that Michael Kaiser, head of the Kennedy Center, lived. And I ran into him in the elevator one day on one of my leaves when I used to come back with the congressional delegations just to stay home for a minute. And I said, guess what we just went through? And I told him. And he said, let's bring him over. I said, Mike, I can't bring him. I'm not going to bring him here. He said, look, we'll put an Iraqi next to a national symphony, Iraqi violinist next to a symphony. We'll bring in Yo-Yo Ma to sit next to whatever he played. What did he play? Cello. We're bringing a bass and a horn. And that we did. We brought him over. Got State Department. I called up State Department. We need a plane. Bring in these Iraqi old symphony guys. Brought them on a plane. Brought them over. Took them to, booked it with President Bush, Secretary Powell, Kennedy Center, big deal, extravaganza. A music company, heard about it, gave them brand new instruments, brand new violins and horns and cellos and gizmos and whatever. And these guys received the concert. I can't remember, it's on a Thursday night. On Tuesday night, these guys got all their brand new instruments. Well, now we got to learn. So they stayed up all night practicing what they were going to play with their new instruments. They'd never, gee whiz, look at this, it works. And then they had a concert. It was just a great success. Just the neatest thing to see that happen.
I read about that concert, and I teach music here, so this is particularly a beautiful story to hear, and I had no idea. It's so incredible to hear your involvement from that elevator meeting. That's amazing.
Well, thank you. Let me close the story with something that just annoyed the hell out of me. So the next 2 days later, the review came out of the Washington Post that this was not a good. The music was missed. They missed this note. They were off on that. This was not up to par. That wasn't the point, idiot. The point was we brought these people over here to free Iraq. Hey, get it? Why do you send a music critic to a thing like that? Anyway, that's another story.
Well, critics,
You know how they are. Yeah. Let me hit you with one last one. We're getting near, and this is not on our sheet, so I'm going to ambush you a little bit. Yeah. You're a Greek kid from the west side of Salt Lake. Your dad owns a beer bar. You get known early on because the bar runs during Prohibition.
Right.
Police comes in.
Yeah.
You're arrested. They asked you what you're doing there. What did you say?
I was 11 years old. It was during the war, and somebody turned me into the vice squad. I was working in a bar, and then if anybody's ever been to Greece, you ought to go to a Greek restaurant and see everybody, mother, dad, grandpa, grandkids all working in the same bar. And the guy said, come on, you're going with us. And I said, my dad wasn't there. And I said, well, why? Well, you're underage and you've been reported. Somebody turned me in is what happened. For working in the bar. Yeah, I was serving beer. Yeah, they'd leave 10-cent tips on the counter and I took it. Yeah, I went to school, didn't miss I was excellent attendance record. We all went to Greek school after American school, and it took me off to the jail. Off I went in the police car, and he said, "How long you been working there?" And I said, "Oh, I don't work there." And he seen me, and so I'm going inside, and I'm sitting in the chair, and pretty soon my dad showed up with. I don't know, is the statute of limitation run? My dad showed up with 5 cases of beer and I went home.
And in the book, in response to the policeman's question, "What are you doing here?" the ambassador replied, "I'm just passing through."
I guess.
Lynn, back to you.
Well, I think that we're basically out of time, and I just wanted to say again that this has been a true honor and pleasure to have you here sharing your history and your stories with us. And on behalf of everybody at Southern Utah University, congratulations on not only the award today, but on the incredible career and history you've had, and we can't wait to see what you do next.
Thank you for that.